What's up, guys? My name is Nicole Gibson. Welcome to my YouTube channel where I help founders win. This is officially my first video, so I'm excited to be recording this with you guys and building a relationship with you over the coming weeks, months, hopefully years if you stick around. My intent here is to help you navigate the complexities of the entrepreneurial journey, because when I made the crazy decision to move to Los Angeles and pursue my entrepreneurial dream to bring a technology to life that never existed before, I was Googling for this content, and it's content that I couldn't find. And it's interesting, what I'm going to do today is go back in time and actually tell you guys a bit about my journey that led me to become a tech founder, because I'm actually a non-technical tech founder, which has challenges of its own for anyone that can relate. I want to share my story because it's going to reveal to you why I have this passion for helping founders' mental health. You know, there's this crazy statistic that says 72% of founders are likely to experience depression. They're more likely to experience suicidal thoughts. And I've given a lot of thought to this as an entrepreneur that originally started my journey tackling the mental health problem and going on my own founder's journey, which I think is the ultimate hero's journey that one can really go on. An entrepreneur is someone that's taking an idea from something that is just in their mind and going on this journey to make it real, which is really radical when you think about some of the companies that have disrupted entire industries, what that really takes. And I think as a founder, your journey can kind of be compared to that of an elite athlete, except an elite athlete has coaches around them that are telling them all the time, hey, you need to rest, you need to recover. We're going to have scheduled recovery every single day. And they know as an athlete that that is essential for them to actually be able to perform at their best. But a founder is basically beholden to shareholders and venture capitalists and teams and other stakeholders that are relying on them to bring this dream to life. And often the pressure is to actually not rest. The pressure is to not take care of themselves. And when you're at the center of gravity in all of those different ways, often it can feel like the world's on your shoulders and there's no way to turn. And very few people, your family and friends and even your partner, or kids, if that's a part of your life, they're not necessarily going to understand. And I do think that there's different kinds of founders. The founder that I feel like I am, and if you're watching my channel, I think that you probably are, is a founder that's doing it for reasons beyond just monetary gain. There's something in your heart that you really believe is going to change the world and create impact. And that's a really special kind of journey. It's choosing a life path that's filled with purpose and meaning and challenge. And for those of you that know and love Joseph Campbell's work like me, he wrote The Hero's Journey. I really do think the founder's journey is the ultimate hero's journey. So that's what this channel is going to be about. And my purpose today is to help you guys get to know me. So I'm going to go all the way back in time and let you into what's brought me here today. I had a really unconventional childhood. I went to a bunch of different schools between London and Australia. And I look back and think that that was really instrumental actually in helping me tackle the ambiguity and the amount of change that you have to navigate as an entrepreneur, because I had to realize really young that really nothing is permanent. Things are always going to change, and the more adaptive and the more flexible you can be, the more successful you're going to be. And that was lessons that I was learning at 5, 6, 7 years old that I think have really served me well. I see a lot of founders when they start the journey and they realize how many times you have to pivot a business and how many times you have to adapt to change. And that can be a really overwhelming thing, but it's something that I've always felt really comfortable with is change and transformation. And I think that was because of my earlier experiences. I had my first love, which was not a person, it was actually an art form, and it was theater. And I left mainstream school at 14 after going, I think, to 8 schools by that point to pursue theater full-time. I went to an excellence academy in Australia where I majored in a particular style of theater that was called Meisner. And the reason I like to include this in my story is because that discipline taught me so much that I apply to my entrepreneurial journey. I apply when I'm speaking on camera. I apply when I'm speaking on stages. And Meisner was about being 100% yourself under the given imaginary circumstances. And so what it was inviting you to do was basically not act, but actually figure out who you are under these given imaginary circumstances. And it forced me as a 15, 16, 17-year-old to really challenge my idea of identity. Because if you were cast in a scene or a circumstance where you had to be someone that, you know, in everyday life you might not identify with, like a thief or a cheater or something like that, you know, if someone kind of accused you of being that in normal life, you would be like, that's not me. You would try to resist that identity. I was sort of brought into this space through my art form where we were forced to kind of realize that these facets of us exist in all of us, that we are actually all things. And so I started asking these really important questions very young. And those important questions were questions like, well, if I'm not, you know, the things that I think I am, if I'm not the subjects that I excel in, if I'm not the material things I own, if I'm not, you know, these things that we identify with, then who am I? And I realized that identity is actually something that can be fluid, and identity is something that we can choose and play with. And again, I think that that's been so key in helping me succeed as an entrepreneur, because at every step, you know, for a founder, at every single funding round, you have to become a new person. The person you were, you know, yesterday often isn't the person that's going to get you to that next iteration. And this often happens in a really condensed amount of time. You know, from the moment you start a startup, you do your pre-seed, your seed, your Series A, your Series B, and maybe, you know, C through to IPO. Sometimes that can be as short as like 5 or 6 years, and you've got to become 5 or 6 different people in that time. So studying that discipline really young allowed me to realize that there's a real power in being able to, you know, decide who you're going to be and make sure that that person is someone that can support your journey, basically. The one thing that I didn't have at that time in my life was support, or maybe a content creator like the content creator I'm hoping to be on this channel, to really help me navigate the challenges I face personally, the challenges I face with my self-esteem, with my sense of self-love. I had a lot of pressure on me. I think every young performer can relate in their own way to kind of be the picture of perfect, to be the ideal. And I was so committed to my art form that when I started to engage in really what became very unhealthy behaviors to try to reach that physical ideal of what I thought success was, you know, I didn't really have anywhere to turn to help me understand that that wasn't, you know, really the right way to go. And in my experience, that led me to start to battle with what became a really critical eating disorder. And that early experience, again, taught me so much about, well, the importance of balance and, you know, prioritizing wellness, because you can be given the most amazing opportunities. And this is also true, very true in the entrepreneurial journey. You know, you might be on the precipice of your dreams coming true or closing a funding round, but if you're not in a healthy state, if you're not regulated, if you're not balanced, it's very hard to leverage and capitalize on those opportunities that are coming your way. And that was something that I got to learn very young going through this eating disorder. Was I was, you know, able to perform every day and be pursuing my dream at that level. And yet I wasn't well. And it was eventually my sickness that led me to this point that I couldn't perform anymore. And that was a really major heartbreak for me, because I realized that if we don't prioritize ourselves, then we can't actually, you know, do the things that we dream about doing. And it also taught me, that experience, a lot about where we are culturally when it comes to dealing with vulnerability, you know, dealing with mental health and having really difficult conversations. And I learned that because I became that difficult conversation. And I witnessed how people in my life, that even people that loved me, you know, really struggled to have that conversation with me, have that hard conversation, even when it was very obvious that I wasn't well, I wasn't okay. And so that made me ask, I think, very poignant and defining questions about the trajectory of my life and the impact I wanted to have on the world. Because one of the questions I asked in amongst that experience of going through anorexia, which is obviously a very physical and obvious condition. So it's not like maybe something like anxiety or depression that you can hide and that's more of an invisible scar. This was something that I was wearing on the outside all the time. So I got to see how people were reacting to that and how uncomfortable it made people and how uncomfortable people were in general, being able to have difficult conversations and humanize others when they're going through difficulty, how bad we are as a society at being present with those areas of the human experience. And so I asked this question, if this is a conversation that the adults and the people in my life are too afraid to have, what other hard conversations are we not having as a world? And as a result of that, what problems are we not solving? That was a very kind of that was an epiphany moment for me, because I recognized that until we start to build higher levels of emotional intelligence individually and then as communities and then as a world, we're really not going to be equipped to solve some of the biggest problems that we're currently facing. And I think this is more than ever playing out in the world right now. Conversations politically, and otherwise are at this point where they're so divisive. You're either an extreme over here or you're an extreme over here. And I think that the need for regulation and healthy discourse and, critical debate that isn't personal, that's actually emotionally regulated, that's never ever been more important. And I think founders and entrepreneurs that are leading companies and teams are such a crucial part of that change. Part of what I want to help you with in this channel is to provide you tools and ways of actually connecting into yourself more, emotionally regulating, so that you can show up that way as a leader. So I think it's one of the greatest gifts you can give to your team, to your family, to the clients that you serve, and so on, the people that watch you. As a leader, you're constantly being watched. And I think that's sometimes a really hard awareness to hold, especially if you're a young leader. You don't often realize that, the throwaway thing that you said, in your team meeting, often your employees are going to be thinking about that for days, weeks, maybe even months, after the fact, and you can't even remember saying it. It's a big responsibility to hold. So the question is, how do we hold that? How do we hold that with confidence and centeredness, and make sure that we're really in alignment to the values that we say are important to us? So, my early experience going through the eating disorder helped me realize how difficult it is for us as a society to regulate. And it was that question that I think catalyzed the beginnings of my entrepreneurial journey, which started as my first company that worked in mental health. It was a nonprofit that worked in mental health. And what was very incredible about that journey is I spent the first 2 years of that journey just listening to people's stories. So the first campaign I ever launched was, I called it a speaking tour, but really it was more like a listening tour, because what ended up taking place was bringing people together, sometimes in a school environment, sometimes in a community environment, like a community center or a local library or a university, sometimes workplaces, and inviting people to share their story of what they were really going through. And when you go back 13 or so years, no one was talking about mental health. So that was kind of my first taste of trying to spearhead or pioneer a conversation that no one wanted to have, that everyone was resistant to, and that I was trying to catalyze and create this change that it felt like no one was in support of, and how that really feels. And I think this is the origin of why and how founders struggle with these feelings of isolation so much, because you're wanting something for the world. You have a vision for the world that, in the very beginning, you don't have that buy-in. And your job as an entrepreneur, your job as a founder is to create that buy-in. That's really, a very big part. I would say like 90% of what you have to do in order to be successful as a founder of a company is to get the people around you almost in like a cult-like fashion to believe in what you do. And so that was my first taste of that. And I remember going to my first few communities and having like, 2 or 3 people rock up to these workshops and just be so resistant and so uncomfortable. And I felt so uncomfortable and responsible as the person that was facilitating these conversations, right? But it was an everyday practice to be like, I'm going to believe in this. I'm going to, sit in the discomfort and the hard conversation. And I'm going to trust that even though others are uncomfortable to have these conversations, these are conversations that people deep down want to have, and that as a society we need to have. And it was that perpetual belief that over months, those groups grew to 10 people, 20 people, 50 people. Then I was being invited to communities to share and to speak, and to invite other people to share and speak. The one thing that I wasn't prepared for during that time was this incredible magic that started to occur in a lot of the spaces that I was facilitating. And that was the recognition that the less I interfered with the space, the less opinions I gave, and the more present I was, the more people started to experience these really deep healings simply by being given the space to be seen and witnessed and heard in their experience. This was my first taste that there really is this kind of innate intelligence that exists in all of us, that when we get out of the way, this magic can occur. And I knew that it wasn't a result of, anything that I was doing, because I was, 18. I took on this crazy dream and ambition, and I was learning every step of the way. It's not like I was a trained professional as such doing this work. And yet people were coming up to me after these sessions and saying, I've been in psychotherapy for 10, 20 years and nothing has been as powerful as this last 2 hours in this experience. And so I started to ask, why? Why is such a simple format of bringing people together in circle and allowing them to talk, why is it having this really profound effect? And I recognize that, change and healing often is this fine balance of having a strong intention and pioneering something, and then also allowing and surrendering to what is. And again, that was a very defining kind of principle in my journey, that as an entrepreneur, I think you have to strike this perfect balance between making it happen and letting it happen. And that also means, balance in yourself and being attuned to the people that you're really trying to serve, and allowing them to co-create it with you was a very powerful thing to learn, I think, early on in my journey. And that listening to her, speaking to her, ended up being almost 2 years of visiting 300 communities and listening to tens of thousands of stories. And after that tour finished, I'd been to so many remote communities, communities that had really tiny populations, as small as like 50, through to big cities and everywhere in between. So I'd seen a really vast amount of humanity in that time. And I realized more than anything that there is so much more of what makes us the same than what separates us. And I had started to define the problem that I was committed to solving in the world. And that's the problem I define as emotional incapacity. I think the inability to be emotionally present with the human experience, with your experience, is one of the key drivers of dysfunction in your own life, in your relationship with yourself, in your immediate relationship with the people you love, and as a world, the inability to be present with each other. And what that looks like in practice is, you have a belief and someone else has a different belief to you, and purely because you believe different things, you draw a line in the sand and say, I refuse to connect to that person. I refuse to have empathy for that person. I refuse to try to understand their experience. And if we could create that shift as a world, we would be living in a very, 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 very different world if all of us could get a little better at that. And so my journey since then has been iterations of trying to solve this very complex and yet in some ways very simple problem, and figuring out how to do that more effectively, more strategically, more accessibly over the past, what's now been almost 14 years in my entrepreneurial journey, starting with community development work in the early days of my journey, which then led me to actually work as a federal commissioner advising the Prime Minister and the Health Minister in Australia. They were interested at the time in how we could shift budget from crisis intervention through to prevention in mental health, and actually health more broadly, because 97 cents of every dollar in mental health was being spent on crisis intervention. And that was a crazy journey too, because I was still the CEO of my nonprofit. I was serving in this advisory role to government. And so I was in kind of two very different worlds, where one week I was deep in community, literally in the Australian desert, you know, rolling up my sleeves and helping these kind of crisis situations for community. And then the next week I would be in Parliament House figuring out how we were going to allocate, you know, these really significant budgets. And it wasn't, it wouldn't have taken a rocket scientist to realize, you know, why these two worlds were disconnected. And so the entrepreneur in me was thinking during these years, how do I solve this problem? Because I could see that at a top level, we were never going to solve this problem bureaucratically. And it's for all kinds of reasons, right? Not to sort of go too deep into it, but there's also this kind of institutional corruption that really does happen between pharmaceutical companies and government, where there's really just a revolving door. And to see that yourself firsthand, I mean, for me, that gave me this drive and this motivation to create a solution that could put the power back in the hands of individuals. I think health is one of the things that we should own out of anything. You know, that should be something that's ours. It shouldn't be something that we're giving the power away of our emotional health, our mental health, even our physical health to other people. First and foremost, you know, we should feel empowered. I have a personal definition of health, which is actually a mirrored definition to what the British, British Medical Journal published. I don't know what year it was. I think it was maybe 2012. That was something along the lines of health is agency. Health is the ability to choose for yourself. And when you look at the engagement process within our mental health care system and our healthcare system, it's just not a part of the user experience. It's not empowering for people. And this was something I really wanted to change. And I could see that the early format of bringing people together and giving them the space to actually own their own story, that was a disruption to the way that the system had previously worked, because it wasn't, you know, someone in a position of power talking down to someone who was highly vulnerable and telling them what to do. It was, what do you think? What do you feel? And what do you need? What do you feel is best for you? Which really flipped the script. And I realized that was going to be, you know, the key in designing a solution that could really change what I believe the healthcare system for good. I think that's one of the most fundamental changes that we need to catalyze and we need to see. And it starts with emotional empowerment, because if we don't have that, there's no foundation to be able to take on a greater sense of freedom and agency within our own lives. And so I'm grateful for those years. You know, they were crazy years of my life, and it was in some ways very kind of overwhelming to be 21 years old, given this very senior position. I think the most of the other people in the positions around me were kind of 3 times my age on average. And I experienced a lot of support, and I also experienced the opposite of that. And that was a powerful lesson in realizing that, you know, when you stand for something, you inevitably then stand against something. And so you're going to have people that believe in you, and you're also going to have people that don't believe in you and maybe even want to see you fail. And that's not a bad thing. That's not something to, you know, be afraid of. But I do think it's something you can handle with wisdom, and you don't have to be volatile. I believe in diplomacy a lot. But also when it comes down to the things that you believe, I think you have to be strong and you have to stand up for what you believe. And so those years was really when this idea for what's now inTruth technology, I think, started to ideate, because I knew that the solution had to be scalable, it had to be accessible, it had to put the power, and I think these days, power is data. It had to put the power in the hands of the individual. But I had no idea how that was going to look. Like I said, I had no technical background, and I got to this place where my final time as commissioner was coming to an end. I felt like my time being CEO of the foundation was also coming to an end. And there was this period where, at kind of 25, I had this quarter life crisis. I actually took a trip to America, and I went out with some friends in New York, and I was walking back over the Brooklyn Bridge, I think at like 4 a.m. And I was just having a complete internal meltdown about what I was going to do next with my life. And it kind of came to me in that moment that I should write a book. Less so because I wanted to write a book that was going to become mega successful, but more because I thought it would be a good opportunity to consolidate my thoughts. So I went on that journey and I wrote my first book, which was called Love Out Loud. And Love Out Loud started to grow this following of people that believed in the message of Love Out Loud. And it was a consolidation of all the things I'd learned working in mental health and hearing people's stories. And it broke down 9 key segments that I think are really important to consider when it comes to loving yourself and loving others. And the philosophy itself literally means discover the love within you and figure out how to express that without the bullshit, without the barriers and the limitations and the contractions that I think so many of us, pride that we experience that just kind of ruins our quality of life. So I explored that in the book, and the book started to grow this following of people that believed in that message. And before I knew it, within less than a year, I was being invited to countries all over the world to speak about my background in mental health and to speak about the message of Love Out Loud. And it was a crazy, crazy time. Definitely, like, some of that era felt like, I was completely on top of the world. And yet I still had so much to learn about what it meant to manage power as a leader and manage influence and be responsible, as the leader of a company. And even though I was impacting a lot of people, I was traveling and speaking to big audiences often, I still felt like it really wasn't the thing that was going to change the world the way that I wanted to. And then, like so many people have stories of how COVID kind of catalyzed major change in their life. That was the first time I had ever stayed in one place, it ended up being 11 months. I'd never stayed in a single location my whole adult life for 11 months. And so I was given this space to think about things in a really different way. And ruminating over this idea, it started to come to me. What if we could actually measure the very thing that I'm seeking to transform in more and more and more people? So emotion. What if we could actually measure that? Could that actually be the vehicle that could change the world in the way and at the scale that I knew was possible somewhere deep inside of me? And so I started kind of talking about this idea, like, what if we could measure emotion through something like a wearable technology, thinking that it was going to be years before anything started to actually transpire from that idea. But from the minute I started to talk about it, this crazy amount of energy just started to take over the whole mission and project. And before I knew it, within a few weeks, I was invited to actually leave Australia, go to Necker Island, which is Richard Branson's island. And if I had said yes, which I ended up saying yes, I knew that if I was to say yes and I was to leave Australia, because of the restrictions, I wasn't going to be allowed back in. So it was this real moment, I think very defining moment for me entrepreneurially, because it was like, if you leave, you have to make this work. And that was kind of like one of the best things that I think could have happened, because I left Australia with no capital, a 10-page pitch deck, this crazy idea with no technical experience, and I had to make it work. So I went to Necker Island and then right after I moved to Los Angeles, and within a few months I'd raised my first investment round. Obviously, there were a lot of things that kind of happened in between, but I think the power of that story was there was no plan B. You know, I committed to the plan and I started to make it work. And, you know, if I can do it, whatever you guys are thinking about creating, I promise you, you can do it. And luckily, I had my first investment meetings on Zoom because I was literally typing into Google during the Zoom call, what is an API? What is an SDK? Like, they were using these terms and I was so non-technical that I had no idea what they were talking about. And it also made me realize that as an entrepreneur, if you're a powerful communicator, you can go out into the world and you can raise money off an idea. And that to me was revolutionary. You know, yeah, then you have to back it up and you have to make it happen. But if you have an amazing idea, there's a value to that I think is unprecedented if you match it with these leadership skills and this ability to communicate, you know, what you really believe and why you're the best person to build it. And I want to see every founder own that. You know, sometimes now when I go back to Australia, it's such a different world to the world here in the United States. And I see the hesitancy and the nervousness that so many amazing founders have when they pitch, for example, or when they talk about their idea, this kind of tall poppy syndrome where they're afraid to kind of become bigger and own their power. And we need more people that want to see positive impact in the world claim that power. And definitely, like, that was probably the biggest lesson in those first few months that I had to learn, is to be bold, you know, ask really big questions to life and to yourself, and expect the best, because then it's going to help you act in accordance with that. So that was a little of my story from, you know, the very beginning of my journey to now. And there's obviously so much more, and there's so much more that I've experienced since those first few months of tackling this crazy ambition to build inTruth Tech. And over the coming episodes, I'm going to share more on that and create the videos that I wished I could have found, you know, 3-4 years ago, because, you know, there were some dark moments when I first moved to LA. I was staying in this really like shitty motel because it was all I could afford at the time. It was dark and dirty. And I remember like going to my YouTube and trying to find content like this to get sort of a gauge on what I was actually in for, because I had no idea. And I think that's uniform for so many people that decide to go on this journey. So they're the videos I want to make, and I'm keen to hear your feedback. If you have questions, if you have things that you want me to cover, please in the comments, write them below, ask me questions, connect with each other. Other than that, follow me on Instagram, subscribe. Those links are below. On Instagram, I'm Nick Gibson _ and keen to go on this journey with you guys.